The street was quiet in the way only late evenings can be, too still, too empty, the kind of silence that makes every sound feel louder than it should. Streetlights reflected softly off the polished black surface of the luxury sedan as it rolled to a smooth stop near the curb. The car didn't belong there, at least not in the eyes of the man watching from his patrol cruiser. The officer leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. He had been on duty for nearly 8 hours, bored, irritated, and hungry for something, anything, to break the monotony. Then he saw it. The car. Expensive. Immaculate. Out of place that he watched as the driver stepped out. A black man in his late 30s. Calm. Well-dressed. Confident without trying. The kind of confidence that didn't ask permission. The officer's jaw set as he flicked on his lights. Red and blue washed over the street, slicing through the quiet like a warning. The man paused, turned slowly, and raised both hands instinctively, not in fear, but in understanding. He had seen this before. Too many times, sir, the officer called out, already stepping from the cruiser. Put your hands where I can see them. The man complied, his movements controlled, deliberate. No sudden gestures. No resistance. Just quiet cooperation. What's the problem, officer? He asked calmly. The officer didn't answer right away. He circled the vehicle instead, eyes scanning the rims, the tinted windows, the license plate. He ran the plate through his system, his lips curling slightly as he waited for something, anything, to justify what he already felt entitled to do. You know why I pulled you over? The officer asked. No, sir, the man replied evenly. The officer scoffed. Figures. He leaned in closer, voice dropping. This car doesn't match the neighborhood. Registration doesn't match the image either. The words hung there, heavy, deliberate. The kind that didn't need explanation. The man exhaled slowly. Everything about the vehicle is legal, he said. You can check. Oh, I will, the officer replied, already reaching for the door handle. Step away from the vehicle. The man hesitated for half a second, not in defiance, but in disbelief, before stepping back. His eyes followed the officer, alert now, aware something was shifting. The officer opened the door without permission. He leaned inside, rummaging through the center console, the glove compartment, searching with growing frustration. You mind telling me what you do for a living? He asked casually, as if the question were harmless. I don't see how that's relevant, the man replied. The officer smirked. It's relevant when someone's driving a car like this in my district. The words landed like a slap. The man's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? That question changed the air. The officer straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. His hand hovered near his radio. Around them, a few nearby windows had begun to glow as people inside sensed something unfolding. A phone camera flickered on from across the street. You're getting real bold for someone who's about to make this difficult, the officer said. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and held up a leather wallet. I'm going to show you my identification, he said. And then I'd like to understand why I'm being treated like a suspect instead of a citizen. The officer watched closely as the ID came into view. His expression changed, just slightly, not shock. Not fear, but something far more dangerous, recognition, and in that instant, the power in the interaction shifted, subtly, invisibly, but enough to crack the foundation of everything the officer thought he controlled. The night, once quiet, now felt charged, and this was only the beginning. The officer's eyes lingered on the ID longer than necessary. The streetlight caught the embossed seal, the fine print, the unmistakable weight of federal authority pressed into leather and laminate. He said nothing at first. Just stared. Then he looked up, slowly, meeting the man's eyes again. Step back, he said, voice firmer now. Sharper. Not calmer, controlled. The man complied without argument, hands returning to his sides. His posture never shifted into submission, but neither did it challenge. He simply waited. The officer turned slightly, angling his body so the body camera caught as little as possible of his expression. His thumb hovered near the radio, hesitating. Whatever he'd just seen had disrupted his rhythm. The casual dominance from moments ago was gone, replaced by calculation. "Who are you really?" the officer asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He glanced around, noticing how the quiet street had begun to fill with subtle witnesses, curtains pulled back, porch lights clicking on, silhouettes gathering behind glass. A phone across the street was still recording, its lens unwavering. "I'm someone who follows the law," he said finally. "Even when it's inconvenient." That response only tightened the officer's jaw. He turned away, pacing a few steps, running the license again as if expecting a different result this time. The dispatcher's voice crackled faintly through the radio, unreadable. The officer exhaled sharply through his nose. "Step over here," he ordered, gesturing toward the rear of the vehicle. The man complied again. Slowly. Carefully. He positioned himself exactly where directed, hands visible, shoulders relaxed. He was cooperating completely, so much so that it made the aggression stand out even more. "What's your destination tonight?" the officer asked. "Home." "From where?" "Work." "What kind of work?" The man looked at him evenly. "Is that required information?" The officer's lips tightened. He circled behind him, boots scraping against the pavement. The body cam caught it all, the tone shift, the unnecessary proximity, the way authority was being pressed into the moment, not for safety, but for control. "You're being evasive," the officer said. "That doesn't help your situation." The man inhaled slowly, then spoke with measured clarity. "I've answered every lawful question you've asked." A pause. The officer stepped closer. "Too close. You think you're smarter than me," he muttered. The man didn't respond, and that silence, steady, composed, was enough to trigger the next move. "Turn around," the officer ordered. "Hands behind your back." The man turned his head slightly. "Am I under arrest?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the man's wrist. That's when the street changed, the click of a phone switching from video to live stream. A voice from a nearby porch, quiet but firm. "Officer, why are you arresting him?" Another phone appeared. Then another. Windows opened wider. A door creaked. The moment had shifted from private confrontation to public stage. The officer's grip tightened. "Sir, stop resisting," he said loudly, "for the cameras now." "I'm not resisting," the man replied calmly, his voice clear and steady. "I'm complying." The officer forced his arms behind his back, snapping one cuff closed with unnecessary force. The metal bite drew a sharp breath from the man, but he didn't cry out. He didn't flinch. He simply looked straight ahead. A neighbor spoke up again. "He hasn't done anything." "Step back," the officer barked. "This is an active police situation." The words echoed hollowly. Even he seemed to hear it. The man was guided toward the cruiser. The door opened with a heavy thud. As he was pushed inside, his phone slipped from his hand and landed screen up on the pavement, still recording. The camera captured everything. The officer noticed too late that he kicked the phone under the car, then slammed the door shut. Inside the cruiser, the man sat upright, breathing slow, eyes steady. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't pleading. He was thinking. The officer walked back to his patrol car, agitation bleeding into every movement. He keyed his radio again, voice low. "Yeah, I've got one detained. Might need backup." There was a pause, then a voice responded, different tone now. "Curious. Cautious, copy. What's the reason for detainment?" The officer hesitated. "Suspicious behavior," he said finally. Another pause. "That's not very specific," came the reply. The officer clenched his jaw. His gaze flicked toward the cruiser again, toward the man inside, sitting perfectly still. The man met his eyes through the glass, and smiled, not smugly, not triumphantly, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly how this ends, because while the officer thought he was asserting control, the truth was already slipping through his fingers, captured on video. witnessed by strangers, and quietly escalating far beyond the reach of a single badge. This was no longer a traffic stop. It was the beginning of exposure. The patrol car idled at the curb, engine humming low, as if trying to mask the tension thickening inside it. The man sat in the back seat, wrists cuffed in front of him now, posture upright, eyes forward. He had stopped trying to speak. Not out of fear, but calculation. Outside, the officer paced once, then twice, rubbing his jaw as if trying to grind away the doubt creeping in. His radio crackled again, this time louder, more insistent. Unit 12, clarify reason for detainment. The officer pressed the talk button, hesitated, then released it without speaking. He glanced toward the cruiser, toward the man watching him through the reinforced glass. That calm expression, unbothered, unreadable, felt like a challenge. He turned his back and stepped a few feet away, lowering his voice as he spoke again into the radio. Subject was behaving suspiciously. Refused to cooperate. There was a pause. A longer one this time. Define refused, dispatch replied. Neutral. Professional. Unconvinced, the officer swallowed. His knuckles tightened around the radio. He questioned my authority. The silence that followed felt heavier than any response. The officer exhaled sharply and clipped the radio back onto his shoulder, irritation flashing across his face. He walked back toward the cruiser with forced confidence, tapping the window with his knuckles. You think you're clever, he said through the glass. You think throwing around attitude makes you untouchable. Inside, the man finally spoke. I think you're making this worse than it needs to be. The officer opened the door abruptly. You don't get to tell me what I'm doing. He leaned in close, too close, invading space that was already confined. The man didn't recoil. Didn't flinch. He simply met the officer's stare. Then why are you still here? He asked quietly. If I've done something wrong, charge me. If not, let me go. The words landed cleanly. No insult. No defiance. Just logic, and logic was dangerous. The officer straightened, jaw flexing. You're being detained pending investigation. Investigation of what? The officer hesitated again. Outside, more bystanders had gathered. A woman across the street held her phone at chest level, clearly recording. Another neighbor leaned against a porch railing, arms crossed, eyes locked on the scene. A passing car slowed, then slowed more. The quiet had turned heavy, expectant. The officer stepped away from the cruiser and paced toward his patrol car again, pretending to check the onboard computer. In reality, his thoughts were unraveling. Nothing he'd done so far would hold up under scrutiny. No probable cause. No clear violation. No threat. He glanced at the screen. The name pulled up from the ID hit him like a punch. He froze, then he read it again, and again. His breathing changed. Slowly, he looked back toward the man in the back seat. The confidence. The calm. The way he'd never once begged or argued. The realization crawled up his spine that he wasn't just wrong, that he was exposed. The officer closed his eyes for half a second, then straightened his uniform as if posture alone could reset the situation. He turned off his body camera. A deliberate choice. He walked back to the cruiser and opened the rear door again. His voice was lower now, quieter, but edged with something sharper. Listen, he said, leaning in. This doesn't have to go any further. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Then uncuff me. The officer ignored that. We can forget this happened. You go home. I go back to my shift. A pause. That's not how this works, the man replied. You stopped me without cause. You searched my vehicle without consent. You detained me without justification. And now you want it to disappear. The officer's face hardened. You don't understand how things work out here. The man met his gaze steadily. I understand exactly how they work. That's the problem. A sharp knock echoed from the side of the cruiser. Officer, a voice called out. We're recording. The officer turned slowly. Two men stood near the sidewalk, phones raised openly now. No fear. Just focus. The officer's jaw clenched. This is a police matter, he snapped. So is accountability, one of them replied. The word hung in the air. The officer exhaled through his nose, trying to rein himself in. He reached into the cruiser and closed the door, harder than necessary. He paced again, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had expected compliance. Maybe irritation. Maybe a warning issued, a lesson taught, control restored. Instead, he had witnesses. Video. A detainee who knew his rights. And a name on the screen that changed everything. He radioed in again, voice tight. I need a supervisor on scene. The response came quicker this time, copy. Supervisor en route. The officer looked back at the man in the car. Their eyes met again. This time, the balance had shifted. The officer wasn't in control anymore. He was waiting, and for the first time since the stop began, he looked uncertain. The street seemed to hold its breath, because everyone, every witness, every phone, every silent observer, could feel it. The moment of reckoning was approaching. The patrol car sat idling beneath the streetlight, its flashing colors now dull against the growing attention gathering around it. The officer stood beside it, arms crossed tightly, posture stiff with restraint. He kept checking his watch, then the road, then the cruiser again, as if willing the situation to rewind. Inside the car, the man remained still. He didn't shift. Didn't speak. Didn't plead. He waited. The distant hum of an approaching engine cut through the tension. A second cruiser turned onto the street, lights off, moving slow and deliberate. It rolled to a stop several yards behind the first. The door opened, and a supervisor stepped out, Sergeant Morales. He scanned the scene with a practiced eye, bystanders, phones raised, the detained man in the back seat, the officer standing rigid beside the vehicle. He took in the details without comment, then approached calmly. What do we have? Morales asked. The officer straightened instantly. Suspicious individual. Vehicle didn't match the area. Refused to cooperate. Morales nodded once, but his eyes drifted toward the cruiser's back seat. He stepped closer, peering through the window. Sir, he said evenly, are you okay? The man met his gaze. I am. I'd like to know why I'm being detained. Morales studied him for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked back at the officer. Step over here. They moved a few paces away. The crowd leaned in instinctively. What's going on? Morales asked quietly. The officer's voice lowered. He was acting suspicious. Wouldn't answer questions. I ran his ID and... Morales pressed. The officer hesitated. And he's federal. The word hung between them. Morales blinked once. Federal? The officer nodded, swallowing hard. His credentials checked out. A pause. A longer one. Morales exhaled slowly through his nose. Did he identify himself? He showed ID, the officer said quickly. I didn't think, you didn't think, Morales repeated, tone flat. The sergeant turned back toward the cruiser, eyes sharpening. He approached the door and crouched slightly to meet the man's gaze through the glass. Sir, he said calmly, I'm Sergeant Morales. I understand there's been some confusion. The man held his eyes steadily. I was stopped without cause. My vehicle was searched without consent. I was detained without explanation. Morales nodded once, absorbing each word. I understand. He straightened and looked at the officer again. Uncuff him. The officer froze. Sergeant, now. The command was quiet, controlled, absolute. The officer hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Now, Morales repeated, reluctantly. The officer opened the door and reached inside. The cuffs clicked open, metal falling away from the man's wrists. He stepped out slowly, rolling his shoulders once, composure intact. The shift was immediate, the power that had been held so tightly moments ago drained from the officer's posture. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted between the man and his supervisor, searching for something: permission, reassurance, forgiveness. That he found none. Morales turned to the man. "Sir, on behalf of this department, I apologize for the inconvenience." The street seemed to inhale, phones lifted higher. A whisper ran through the onlookers. The man nodded once. "I appreciate that." Morales continued, his voice firm. "You are free to go. Your vehicle will not be searched further." The man glanced at the officer, then back to Morales. "I'd like my property returned." The officer stiffened. Morales looked at him. "You heard him." With stiff movements, the officer retrieved the man's phone from beneath the cruiser and handed it over. The man checked the screen. "Still recording, good." He turned back to Morales. "Thank you." Morales gave a brief nod. Then his gaze hardened as it shifted back to his subordinate. "Officer," he said quietly, "we're going to have a conversation." The officer swallowed. Morales turned back to the man one last time. "You're free to go, sir." The man paused, looking around at the gathered faces, the phone still capturing every angle. Then he spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for all to hear. "I hope this never happens to anyone else." Then he walked to his car. The door closed softly. The engine started. As the car pulled away, the crowd parted without a word. Silence returned to the street, but the damage had already been done. The officer stood frozen, eyes fixed on the taillights disappearing into the distance. The weight of what had just unfolded pressed down on him, not with force, but with certainty. This wasn't over, not even close. The siren lights went dark, and for the first time that night, the power had completely shifted. The street returned to its ordinary quiet, but nothing about the night felt normal anymore. The patrol lights shut off one by one, leaving the scene washed in the soft amber glow of street lamps. The bystanders lingered for a moment longer, phones still raised, replaying what they'd just witnessed, replaying it for themselves, and for the world beyond the block. Then, slowly, they drifted back inside. Doors closed. Curtains fell, but the moment didn't end there. Inside the patrol car, the officer sat stiffly in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. The engine idled, humming like a reminder he couldn't silence. His jaw was locked tight, the muscles twitching as if bracing for impact. He hadn't spoken since the man drove away. Sergeant Morales stood beside the open driver's door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You understand this isn't going away," he said evenly. The officer swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to. Intent doesn't change outcome," Morales replied. "And outcomes have consequences." The officer said nothing. He already knew. Morales straightened, his tone shifting from controlled to procedural. "Turn off the vehicle. Step out." The officer complied, slower now. When his boots touched the pavement, it felt like stepping into a different reality, one where the uniform no longer shielded him. Morales motioned toward the curb. "Sit." The officer obeyed. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived, followed by an unmarked sedan. The quiet street filled again, this time with command-level presence. Radios crackled. Doors opened and shut. Names were exchanged quietly. One of the arriving supervisors pulled Morales aside. Their conversation was low, clipped, and serious. Every so often, both men glanced toward the seated officer. Across the street, behind a living room window, a phone camera was still rolling. The footage, clear, steady, unbroken, was already uploading. Inside the department's digital systems, the video began spreading before anyone could stop it. Shared to a neighborhood group. Then forwarded again. Then clipped, captioned, and reposted. By the time the officer was formally escorted to the back of a different cruiser, his name was already appearing in comment threads. The man he had detained sat at home now, jacket removed, phone charging on the counter. He hadn't said a word since driving away. He didn't need to. His phone buzzed once, then again, and again. Messages. Missed calls. Alerts that he didn't rush to answer them. Instead, he watched the footage, his footage, play out across his screen. The calm. The restraint. The moment the power shifted. The apology caught on audio. The quiet authority in his own voice that he watched it the way someone watches a storm from a distance, aware of its force, but untouched by its chaos. Back at the station, the officer sat in a small interview room. No badge. No belt. Just a chair, a table, and a camera mounted high in the corner. A supervisor entered and closed the door. Badge and firearm, he said. The officer hesitated, then complied. The metal clink echoed louder than it should have. The supervisor took a seat across from him. You're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The officer stared at the table. You violated department policy, the supervisor continued. You conducted an unlawful stop. You escalated without cause. You attempted to detain a federal agent. The officer's head snapped up. I didn't know who he was. That doesn't matter, the supervisor replied calmly. The law applies before identity. Silence stretched between them. You'll be contacted by Internal Affairs, the supervisor added. Until then, you're not to perform any law enforcement duties. The officer nodded once, slowly. His jaw tightened. For the first time, there was no one left to deflect onto. No suspect. No excuse, just consequences. Across town, the man sat at his kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee growing cold in his hands. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a colleague. Saw the video. Are you okay? He typed back a single word, yes, then, after a pause, added another, but this needs to be addressed. The footage continued to spread overnight. News outlets picked it up by morning. Clips aired with headlines stripped of emotion, just facts laid bare. The stop. The detention. The apology. Experts weighed in. Former officers. Civil rights attorneys. Policy analysts. The consensus was clear, the stop had crossed lines. By the next afternoon, the department released a statement confirming an internal investigation and the officer's suspension. The language was careful. Measured. Corporate, but the public response was anything but. Comment sections filled. Calls for accountability grew louder. Community leaders spoke out. Demands for reform echoed beyond the city, and through it all, the man at the center of it remained silent. He didn't do interviews. He didn't post statements. He didn't seek attention. He let the facts speak. I and the precinct. The officer sat alone in the locker room, uniform locker open, staring at the empty hook where his badge once hung. The weight of it finally settled in, not the loss of power. The realization that it had never truly been his to misuse, and that the system he'd leaned on so casually had finally turned its gaze inward. The reckoning had begun. The morning after the video went viral, the department woke up to a reality it could no longer manage quietly. Internal inboxes flooded before sunrise. City officials demanded briefings. Legal counsel requested full access to body cam archives. The chief's office scheduled an emergency review session before most of the precinct had finished their first coffee. The story had outgrown the incident. It was no longer about one stop, one officer, or one night. It had become a mirror. In the conference room on the third floor, senior leadership sat in a tight formation. Screens along the wall replayed the footage in silence, every angle, every timestamp, every decision slowed down and examined. No narration. No commentary. Just evidence. The room stayed quiet until the video ended, then the chief spoke. This cannot happen again. No one argued. Policies were pulled up. Training manuals. Use of authority guidelines. Everything that had once been treated as routine now felt fragile, exposed under scrutiny. An Internal Affairs captain cleared his throat. We've completed a preliminary review. The stop violated departmental procedure at multiple points. There was no articulable suspicion. The search was unjustified. The detention was improper. A pause. The officer's actions created significant liability. The word hung in the air, liability. Not morality. Not shame. The system spoke in terms it understood. The chief nodded slowly. What's our corrective plan? The room shifted. This was the moment institutions either protect themselves, or change. We recommend immediate disciplinary proceedings, the captain continued. Mandatory retraining across patrol units. Body cam protocol reinforcement. And a full audit of stop and search practices. Another voice joined in. We also need to address public trust. Transparency. External review. The chief leaned back, considering. Outside the room, reporters waited. Inside, reputations were on the line. Do it, the chief said finally. All of it. Across the city, the man at the center of the storm watched the press conference live. He stood in his living room, arms crossed, listening as officials spoke carefully crafted sentences. We acknowledge the concerns of the community, we are committed to accountability, we are reviewing our procedures. He'd heard variations of those words before. This time, though, something was different. There was movement behind the language. By the end of the week, the department announced mandatory de-escalation retraining for all patrol officers. Policy updates were issued. New oversight protocols rolled out. An independent review board was formed, one with actual authority, and quietly, without fanfare, the officer at the center of it all was placed on unpaid suspension pending final review. The man read the update on his phone and set it down slowly. He didn't smile. Justice, he knew, wasn't a single moment. It was a process. A pressure applied long enough to force change. The city felt it too. Conversations shifted, from outrage to examination. From shock to expectation. Community meetings filled with people who had never attended one before. Questions were asked out loud. Demands were made calmly, persistently. The system was being watched now. In a small office downtown, the officer sat alone again, this time without a uniform, without authority. A letter lay open on the desk in front of him, outlining the formal investigation, the potential outcomes, the path ahead. He stared at it, unmoving. For the first time in his career, he wasn't certain of the ending. Meanwhile, the man whose night had been upended returned to his routine. Work. Home. Life continuing forward. But something in him had shifted too, not anger, not fear, resolve. He hadn't sought to make an example of anyone, but an example had been made, and as policies changed, as training manuals were rewritten, as a department reckoned with its own reflection, one truth remained clear: power, when left unchecked, corrodes, but when challenged, calmly, lawfully, relentlessly, it can be reshaped. The system was still imperfect. But it was no longer pretending everything was fine, and that, for the first time in a long while, felt like the beginning of something real. Weeks later, the street looked the same as it always had, same pavement. Same streetlights. Same quiet rhythm of everyday life, but something beneath it had shifted. The man walked that block again one evening, hands in his pockets, unhurried. No cameras followed him now. No officers watched from across the street. Just the soft hum of the city settling into night. He paused where it had happened, not out of fear, out of reflection. What stayed with him wasn't the anger, or even the injustice. It was the moment of stillness, the moment when power realized it was being watched. When authority met accountability and had nowhere to hide, that moment had rippled outward. A single stop had forced conversations in rooms that preferred silence. Policies were questioned. Assumptions examined. Lines redrawn. Not perfectly. Not completely, but meaningfully. He knew the system wasn't fixed. Not yet. Maybe not ever entirely, but he also knew something else now: change doesn't always arrive shouting, sometimes it arrives calmly. Documented. Witnessed. Recorded. Sometimes it comes from someone who refuses to escalate, and refuses to disappear. As he walked away, the streetlight behind him flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere across the city, someone watched the same video again, not for outrage this time, but for reassurance, proof that power can be challenged, that accountability is possible, that silence doesn't have to be the ending, and that justice, when demanded without rage but with resolve, still has the power to move the world forward.